Hey guys, tonight we begin with the delightfully dysfunctional world of the ancient Greek gods, a pantheon so powerful, so dramatic, and so emotionally unstable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with the big guy himself, Zeus, god of the sky, ruler of Olympus, and walking proof that absolute power absolutely fries your sense of boundaries. Zeus was the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea. His dad, like all great fathers, had a habit of swallowing his children whole to prevent them from overthrowing him. Romantic. Fortunately, Rhea saved baby Zeus by tricking Cronus with a rock in a blanket, which tells you a lot about how closely this guy paid attention. Once Zeus grew up, he led a divine rebellion against Cronus, sliced open his father's stomach, Freud would have a field day, and freed his siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Hestia, and Demeter. Boom. The original dysfunctional family was born. After the gods won the war against the Titans, Zeus became king. He ruled the heavens, controlled thunder and lightning, and was in charge of cosmic order, justice, and oaths. In theory, that is. In practice, Zeus spent most of his time transforming into various animals and seducing anything with a pulse. Swans, bulls, eagles, golden mist. The man had no chill and no consistent moral code. Imagine your country's Supreme Court justice turning into a goose to flirt with civilians. That's Zeus, but with more lightning. His love life was an open-source disaster. He married his sister Hera, which went about as well as you'd expect. He had dozens of affairs, with goddesses, nymphs, mortals, and probably one or two houseplants. The result? An overwhelming number of demigod children, many of whom had serious parental abandonment issues, and accidentally founded entire mythologies. But despite all that, Zeus wasn't entirely chaotic. When he wasn't cheating or chucking lightning bolts at mortals who didn't offer proper sacrifices, he did act as the cosmic referee. He enforced oaths, upheld law, and occasionally punished people for being more arrogant than he was, which, frankly, took effort. Zeus was respected, feared, and constantly causing PR nightmares for Olympus. He had power, presence, and zero understanding of personal space. He was both protector and predator, judge and joke, the ultimate divine contradiction. Hera is technically the goddess of marriage, family, and childbirth, which is ironic because her own marriage is an absolute dumpster fire in a golden chariot. She's Zeus's wife, also his sister, because, mythology. Their wedding was supposed to be the divine ideal of sacred union. Instead, it turned into a centuries-long soap opera filled with infidelity, revenge, and a shocking number of people turned into animals, or trees, or stone. Hera is powerful, the undisputed queen of the gods, but her power mostly expresses itself in one very specific way: vengeance. Not on Zeus, of course. No, that would be too simple. Hera's fury is laser-focused on the women Zeus seduces, or let's be honest, outright kidnaps, and their unfortunate children. She once turned a woman into a cow, cursed another to only speak in echoes, and in one particularly cruel moment, tried to kill baby Hercules with a pair of serpents. That was literally his baby. Hers? No. His? Still nope. It's hard to blame her entirely. Imagine being the goddess of marriage while your husband is out here inventing new forms of animal-based flirtation. But still, her divine coping mechanisms often included eternal curses and elaborate punishments. Therapy wasn't a thing in ancient Greece, so revenge was the next best option. Yet despite all that, Hera wasn't just a celestial grudge holder. She also protected women in childbirth, upheld the sanctity of marriage, theoretically, and punished oaths broken by mortals. She had temples, priests, and a devoted cult following. Cities like Argos and Samos worshipped her as a major force of divine order. In short, Hera was the goddess you prayed to when your husband was faithful, and the one who probably sent a plague when he wasn't. She's a fascinating paradox, the embodiment of female dignity and power in a system that constantly humiliated her. Her story isn't just about jealousy. It's about a woman who was supposed to symbolize unity, while holding Olympus together with pure spite and decorative fury. Poseidon was the god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, and, for some reason, horses. Because nothing says ocean god like a herd of galloping stallions. But hey, mythology. He was one of the three main brothers. Zeus got the sky, Hades got the underworld, and Poseidon got everything wet, which suited him just fine. He ruled over the vast oceans, commanded sea creatures both beautiful and nightmarish, and wielded a massive trident, not just a pointy fork, but a three-pronged divine rage stick capable of levelling entire cities. Poseidon was revered and feared in equal measure. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage. Fishermen made offerings. City builders asked his permission before putting anything too close to the shoreline, lest it become beachfront property by accident. But let's be honest, Poseidon had issues. Big, crashing, tidal wave-sized emotional issues. He was the classic unpredictable uncle. Sometimes generous, sometimes devastating, always a bit salty. One moment he's creating islands. The next, he's flooding your crops because someone forgot to thank him during a sacrificial goat ceremony. He once struck the ground so hard with his trident that he caused an earthquake, just because he lost a city naming contest to Athena. Seriously. She gave Athens an olive tree. He offered a saltwater spring. The people chose olives. He chose vengeance. That's Poseidon in a nutshell. He also had a rather complicated love life. There were nymphs, mortals, even one incident involving Medusa, which ended with her getting snake hair and a monster label, and him walking away without consequences. Classic. Despite all that, Poseidon wasn't just a stormy brute. He was a protector of seafarers, a builder of cities, and, in his calmer moments, a god of prosperity and fertility. He was essential to ancient Greek life, especially for a culture so dependent on the sea. But like the ocean itself, he was always one storm away from reminding everyone who was really in charge. Hades is the god of the underworld, not hell exactly, but a vast, gloomy realm where all souls eventually clock out for eternity. Contrary to modern pop culture, Hades wasn't evil. He wasn't even particularly cruel. He was just incredibly tired of everyone. While Zeus got the sky and Poseidon got the seas, Hades drew the short straw and got stuck managing the ancient Greek version of customer service for the dead. For eternity, in darkness, surrounded by wailing, Hades ruled the underworld with a quiet, brooding authority. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He didn't throw lightning or crash weddings. He just showed up to work every day, managing the logistics of eternity and making sure souls didn't sneak out the back. The ultimate middle manager. His domain was called Hades too, because apparently naming a kingdom after yourself wasn't a red flag back then. It had sections for the heroic, Elysium, the average, Asphodel, and the truly awful, Tartarus, ancient Greece's version of a very long detention. And guess who had to oversee all of it? That's right, Hades, the goth workaholic of the gods. Now, about Persephone. Yes, he kidnapped her. Not great. Definitely problematic. But also, and Greek mythology is nothing if not inconsistent, they actually grew into a functional, weirdly stable marriage. She spent half the year with him, bringing life to the underworld, and the other half on Earth, causing spring. It's less romance, more mythological timeshare. Hades was also the original pet dad. His dog, Cerberus, had 3 heads, a temper, and 0 obedience training. But he kept souls in line. Mostly. Unlike his brothers, Hades didn't cheat, didn't rage, and didn't crave the spotlight. That's probably why ancient Greeks rarely built temples for him. They were terrified of attracting his attention. He was the quiet, grim uncle you didn't invite to the party, but still respected from a safe, polite distance. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, handicrafts, and staying 10 steps ahead of everyone without breaking a sweat. She's basically the divine embodiment of logic in a world full of emotional wrecks with lightning bolts. Her birth alone is enough to give Freud nightmares. Zeus, after swallowing her pregnant mother Metis, because prophecy of course, developed a splitting headache. Instead of aspirin, he got a hammer to the skull. And out popped Athena, fully grown, fully armoured, and fully unimpressed with everyone. From day one, Athena made it clear she was not here for nonsense. Unlike her war-happy brother Ares, Athena viewed conflict like a chessboard, something to be analysed, controlled and won, with minimal shouting and maximum efficiency. If Ares was a chaotic bar fight, Athena was a war room with spreadsheets. She's also the goddess of crafts, which might seem out of place until you realise weaving in her hands was a battlefield. Just ask Arachne, a mortal who dared challenge Athena to a weaving contest. Arachne won, technically, but was then turned into a spider for being a little too talented. Moral of the story: be humble, or enjoy your new life in the corner of someone's ceiling. Athena stayed out of romance entirely. Unlike the rest of Olympus, she didn't seduce mortals, marry her brother, or transform into questionable animals. She simply had things to do, cities to protect, heroes to advise, owls to raise. She guided Odysseus home, helped Perseus behead Medusa, and probably edited the Iliad with a red pen. Athena is the goddess you'd want on your debate team, in your war council, or running your startup. She doesn't scream, she doesn't scheme, she simply outsmarts, always. Ares was the Greek god of war, bloodshed, and punching first, thinking never. If Athena was war with a blueprint, Ares was war with a sledgehammer and poor impulse control. He represented the brutal, raw chaos of battle, the part where screaming men charged into each other, and no one really knew what was happening except that things were on fire and someone just lost a helmet. In short, if Ares shows up, things are about to get loud, violent, and deeply disorganized. Personality-wise, he wasn't exactly Olympus's favourite guest. Even his fellow gods didn't like him. Zeus once called him the most hateful of all the gods, and you know you've messed up when Zeus is calling you a problem. Ares was arrogant, hot-headed, and about as subtle as a flaming chariot. He wasn't particularly respected either. The Greeks admired strategy, restraint, and cleverness, things Ares consistently failed to bring to the table. He didn't win battles with tactics. He just stormed in swinging. That worked occasionally, but more often than not, it left a trail of dead bodies and deeply annoyed allies. That said, Ares was still terrifying. He was the god of fear, literally. His sons were named Phobos and Deimos, aka panic and terror, and he loved being in the thick of a brawl. He also had an affair with Aphrodite, which sounds romantic until you remember it ended with him getting caught in an invisible net by her husband Hephaestus and laughed at by the entire pantheon. Ancient Greek tabloids had a field day. In Roman mythology, Ares got a makeover as Mars, more disciplined, more honourable, less sweaty, but in Greece he stayed the chaotic, muscle-bound avatar of violence. Still, Ares had his moments. In times of actual war, he was feared and revered. Warriors made sacrifices to him, hoping he'd bring them strength, or at least ignore them for a while. And when he wasn't breaking things, he did ride a cool chariot pulled by fire-breathing horses, which earns him at least one style point. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, desire, and romantic messes with extremely high body counts. If you've ever seen someone fall in love way too fast with exactly the wrong person, congratulations, you've witnessed Aphrodite's divine influence. There are two origin stories for her, depending on how much trauma you can stomach. In one version, she's the daughter of Zeus and Dion. In the older, and frankly, much weirder version. She's born from the sea foam that formed when Cronus chopped off Uranus's, godly equipment and tossed it into the ocean. And yes, that's probably the least romantic origin ever assigned to the goddess of romance. Aphrodite was so stunningly beautiful that mortals and gods alike basically lost their ability to make good decisions in her presence. She had an actual magical belt, the cestus, that made her irresistible to anyone, which, let's be honest, is a mildly unfair advantage in the love department. Despite being the embodiment of desire, Aphrodite's own love life was complicated. She was married to Hephaestus, the hard-working god of fire and blacksmithing, but she famously preferred the company of Ares, the god of war, which tells you everything you need to know about her taste in men. Their affair was exposed when Hephaestus trapped them mid-romance in a golden net and summoned the other gods to come take a look. Ancient Greece, where revenge and group humiliation were considered excellent conflict resolution. But Aphrodite wasn't all chaos and cheating. She had a softer side, too. She helped young lovers, presided over weddings, and brought beauty to the world. She was the goddess people prayed to before confessing a crush or trying to charm their way out of something stupid. Still, she wasn't above starting wars. She's the one who offered Helen of Troy to Paris, sparking the Trojan War. Why? Because she wanted to win a divine beauty contest. Yes, really. An entire civilization burned because Aphrodite wanted a golden apple that said, "To the fairest." She's the patron goddess of desire, not stability. Beautiful, intoxicating, and absolutely not interested in your relationship boundaries. Hephaestus was the god of fire, metalworking, craftsmanship, and being the only Olympian who actually had a job. While the rest of the gods were busy starting wars, chasing mortals, or throwing lightning like confetti, Hephaestus was in the workshop, forging weapons, building palaces, and muttering under his breath. His origin story varies, but none of it is flattering. In one version, he's born deformed, and Hera, repulsed by his appearance, tosses him off Mount Olympus like unwanted luggage. In another, Zeus does the tossing after a family argument. Either way, the man falls from heaven, lands hard, and ends up with a permanent limp and probably some abandonment issues the size of Crete. Despite the rocky start, Hephaestus gets back to Olympus. Not through forgiveness, but through leverage. He crafts Hera a magical golden throne, which, surprise, traps her. The gods beg him to return and free her. He agrees, but only if they let him back into the divine club. Negotiation. Nailed. Now back in Olympus, Hephaestus becomes the divine handyman. He forges Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, Achilles' armor, and pretty much every magical item anyone brags about. If it glows, flies, or explodes, Hephaestus probably made it while working unpaid overtime. And yet, for all his brilliance, he was consistently disrespected. His wife, Aphrodite, assigned, not chosen, famously cheated on him with Ares. His family, emotionally distant to put it kindly. His co-workers, constantly breaking the stuff he just fixed. But Hephaestus never lashed out like Ares or schemed like Hera. His revenge was creative, elegant, passive-aggressive even. That net he used to catch Aphrodite and Ares mid-affair, artisan-crafted, and designed for maximum public humiliation, practical and poetic. He's not glamorous, he doesn't sparkle, but he's the god who built Olympus, literally. Hephaestus is the unsung hero, the working-class deity of the gods, the patron of blacksmiths, artisans, inventors, and anyone who's ever screamed at a malfunctioning machine and then fixed it with duct tape and rage. Hermes is the god of travellers, commerce, thieves, messaging, and suspiciously fast talking. He's the guy with winged sandals, a staff that probably came with no user manual, and an energy that screams, "I've already eaten 3 olives and lied twice today." Unlike most gods, Hermes hit the ground running, literally. On the day of his birth, he crawled out of his crib, stole Apollo's cattle, invented the lyre using a tortoise shell, and then returned to his cradle before anyone noticed. That's day one. Most gods take centuries to cause that much chaos. Hermes needed about 6 hours. He's known as the messenger of the gods, but that's underselling it. He didn't just deliver messages, he smuggled souls into the underworld, guided heroes through enemy territory, and probably invented the divine version of express shipping. If there was trouble, Hermes was already 2 steps ahead of it, leaving behind a suspiciously vague alibi and a charming grin. He also served as the god of commerce and trade, because nothing says trustworthy marketplace energy like the same guy who oversees thievery. Hermes represented negotiation, persuasion, and morally flexible entrepreneurship. Basically, the patron saint of salesmen, travellers, pickpockets, and anyone who's ever bartered at a flea market. But he wasn't just a charming rogue. Hermes was loyal when it counted. He helped Odysseus outsmart Circe. He gave Perseus the tools to behead Medusa. He even guided souls to the underworld with surprising tenderness, proving that beneath all that mischief, he had a job he took seriously. Hermes also had a signature accessory, the caduceus, a winged staff with 2 intertwined snakes. It's often confused with the symbol of medicine, which is ironic, considering Hermes's primary qualifications were speed, lying, and professional boundary hopping. If Olympus had an IT department, Hermes would be the over-caffeinated tech guy who speaks in acronyms, solves your problems in 2 minutes, and then disappears to go optimize cloud functions, which may or may not involve stealing Zeus's wallet. He's clever, quick, unreliable, and deeply lovable. The god of getting things done, getting away with it, and not answering follow-up questions. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, grain, and giving life to the world, provided she's in the mood. When Demeter is happy, crops flourish, trees bear fruit, and the world blooms with abundance. When she's upset, well, say hello to winter, famine, and general withering disappointment. She's one of the quieter Olympians. Doesn't throw thunderbolts, doesn't start wars, doesn't turn people into animals. But don't mistake quiet for harmless. She can shut down the planet's food supply with one bad mood. Which, as it turns out, she did. Enter Persephone, her beloved daughter, the literal flower child of Olympus. One day, Persephone is out picking flowers, minding her own mythological business, when the earth opens up and Hades, god of the underworld and professional kidnapper, swoops in and abducts her. Classic Greek parenting crisis. Demeter, understandably, loses her divine mind. She searches the earth in grief, refusing to let anything grow until her daughter is returned. Crops fail, animals starve, mortals beg for mercy. Demeter's response? No Persephone, no produce. Eventually, Zeus intervenes, mostly because the humans are dying and no one's getting any sacrifices. A deal is struck. Persephone will spend part of the year with Hades, part with Demeter, and thus the seasons are born. Spring and summer, Demeter's happy. Fall and winter, she's pouting. So yes, one of the most important natural cycles in human existence comes from Demeter's seasonal mood swings. Global agriculture powered by maternal grief and emotional blackmail. Mythology at its finest. Demeter also had a strong sense of justice. She once taught humans how to grow wheat and build civilizations, then turned around and burned a royal baby because the parents interrupted her mid-ritual. It's a fine line between goddess of life and terrifying earth witch. But at her core, Demeter represents nurture, resilience, and the sacred bond between mother and child. She brings life from the ground and takes it away just as easily. Dionysus is the god of wine, revelry, fertility, theatre, madness, and those questionable decisions you make after your third glass of whatever he's pouring. He's the divine embodiment of YOLO, wrapped in ivy, slightly intoxicated, and possibly summoning a panther. Born under very dramatic circumstances, Dionysus started life as the child of Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele. When Hera found out, because of course she did, She tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal his true godly form. Spoiler, it vaporized her. Zeus, ever the problem solver, stitched the unborn Dionysus into his thigh and carried him to term. Yes, thigh pregnancy. Greek mythology, where nothing is weird enough to question. Dionysus grew up wandering the earth, spreading winemaking, chaotic joy, and mild existential dread. He was followed by a rowdy entourage of satyrs, maenads, and woodland party crashers, a travelling circus of ecstasy and potential property damage. His worship wasn't just about fun and grapes. Dionysian rituals involved letting go of your identity, your inhibitions, and sometimes your clothes. His festivals were wild, immersive, and often involved masks, theatre, and very questionable decisions under the stars. Think Burning Man, but with divine consequences. But Dionysus wasn't all fun and fermented joy. He had a temper, a very theatrical one. If you mocked him, refused his worship, or interrupted his vibe, things got weird. One king who banned his cult was driven mad and dismembered by his own people. Another was turned into a dolphin. He didn't do light punishment. He did statement punishments. Yet he was also deeply compassionate, especially to outcasts, misfits, and those outside polite society. He gave comfort to the broken, voice to the silenced, and occasionally transformed people into vines, which is probably symbolic of something. Dionysus is the paradox of divine liberation and chaos. He's joy and destruction, art and madness, the god who blesses you with creativity one moment and has you dancing barefoot in a vineyard the next, questioning your life choices. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, wild animals, and the moon. She's also the goddess of, no, I will not explain myself, and yes, that was a threat. Often depicted with a bow in one hand and zero tolerance in the other, Artemis is one of the few Olympians who didn't need thunderbolts or love potions. She had precision, discipline, and a pack of divine wolves. Twin sister to Apollo, Artemis arrived in this world in typical overachiever fashion. She helped deliver her own brother shortly after her own birth. From that moment forward, she was done with men. She swore off marriage, romance, and anything remotely resembling emotional vulnerability. Instead, she roamed forests, hunted stags, and surrounded herself with a loyal band of maiden followers who all shared her love for nature and disinterest in drama. Artemis is best known for her purity, not in a Victorian fainting couch way, but more in the touch me and I turn you into a deer way. Take Actaeon, for instance, a hunter who accidentally stumbled upon her bathing. Rather than calmly explain boundaries, she transformed him into a stag and let his own dogs tear him apart. Message received. She was fiercely protective, especially of women and children. While many Olympian gods treated mortals like chess pieces or dating apps, Artemis acted as a divine shield for the vulnerable. She punished those who disrespected sacred nature or harmed the innocent, and her vengeance was swift, poetic, and usually fatal. As a moon goddess, she represented calm, clarity, and mystery. She brought light to the night and guided travelers through darkness, metaphorically and literally. If Apollo was the sun's blinding brilliance, Artemis was the moon's cold, focused stare. Less warmth, more watchfulness. She wasn't flashy, but she didn't need to be. Artemis had presence. You didn't challenge her. You didn't flirt with her. You just hoped she wasn't aiming in your direction. In modern terms, Artemis is the original independent woman. Fierce, free, and entirely uninterested in what you think of her. She didn't live in Olympus. She ran in the woods. Apollo is the god of the sun, music, prophecy, healing, poetry, archery, and, honestly, at this point, just assume he put his name on every job opening on Mount Olympus. If the gods had LinkedIn, Apollo's profile would crash the site. Twin brother of Artemis, Apollo is the shiny, radiant poster child of Olympus. Golden hair, golden lyre, golden chariot. He's the reason we have daylight, according to Greek myth, as he literally drove the sun across the sky every day in a flaming chariot. No pressure if you're running late. But beneath all that brilliance lies a lot of feelings. Apollo is dramatic. He's emotional. He's the guy who sings ballads after a breakup and then curses the person who rejected him. Literally. Ask Daphne. She turned into a tree just to get away from him. Apollo mourned her loss, then turned her into a sacred symbol and wore her leaves as a crown. Because that's healthy. He's also the god of prophecy, which means he technically knows things will end badly, and still gets upset when they do. Classic overachiever energy. He established the Oracle of Delphi, where priestesses, fueled by divine madness, mumbled poetic riddles that somehow explained everyone's destiny. Very user-friendly. Apollo had a complicated relationship with love. He chased several mortals, was rejected by most, and reacted with varying degrees of poetic overkill. When a Spartan prince named Hyacinthus died during a discus game, possibly from Apollo's own poorly thrown disc, he was so distraught he turned the boy into a flower, which is sweet if you ignore the blunt force trauma part. Despite all this, Apollo was also a healer. His son Asclepius became the god of medicine, and Apollo himself could cure plagues, or cause them, depending on how offended he felt that day. In short, Apollo was brilliance wrapped in insecurity, power dressed in poetry, and charm with a short fuse. The kind of god who'd write you a love song and then shoot you with an arrow if you didn't clap. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, home, and domestic peace, which is ancient Greek for the only Olympian who didn't cause weekly international incidents. She was the eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, and also the first to be swallowed whole by her charmingly paranoid father. Later, she was the last to be vomited back up when Zeus overthrew him, which means, technically, she's both the oldest and youngest Olympian. Yes, Greek mythology is a funhouse mirror of logic. Unlike her more chaotic siblings, Hestia chose peace. She didn't participate in power struggles, didn't throw curses, didn't sleep with mortals, and didn't even throw shade. She was offered a throne on Olympus, shrugged politely, and gave it up to Dionysus. Why? So she could tend the eternal flame and not get dragged into family drama. Queen behaviour. She presided over the hearth, the centre of every home, temple, and city. Wherever there was a flame burning for warmth, food, or ritual, Hestia was there in spirit. No temples in her name, no scandalous myths, just a quiet presence that made everything else work. The original background essential. She was also the goddess of hospitality. In a world where shelter and food meant survival, she represented the sacred duty of caring for guests. Invoking her meant your fire would stay lit, your bread wouldn't burn, and hopefully your relatives would leave on time. And unlike most Olympians, she didn't go around turning people into animals, inanimate objects, or ironic morality lessons. Hestia didn't need revenge. She had a well-swept floor and inner peace. Because of her, every meal began and ended with an offering. Every city had her flame burning in its heart, and every prayer circle probably had someone whispering, "Thank you for not being a handful." If the gods were a dysfunctional office, Zeus would be the CEO with boundary issues, Athena the overqualified strategist, Dionysus the HR violation, and Hestia would be the calm office manager, keeping the coffee warm and the lights on, while everyone else argued about whose temple caught fire. Hestia reminds us that there's power in stillness, value in simplicity, and sometimes the most essential figure is the one who doesn't demand attention, but holds everything together. Persephone is one of the most fascinating figures in Greek mythology, a goddess with a split personality written directly into the seasons. She's the bloom of spring and the chill of death, life and decay, flower crown and iron throne. She's the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, which already puts her in the realm of life and fertility. But then things took a turn, as they often do in Greek myth, when Hades, lord of the underworld, saw her picking flowers and decided, wife material. He abducted her, straight into the underworld. No discussion, no coffee first. Demeter, naturally, was devastated. She scoured the earth, and when no one told her where Persephone had gone, she shut down agriculture entirely. The result? Global famine and an angry mob of hungry mortals. Eventually, Zeus intervened, not out of fatherly concern, but because no one was sacrificing anything while starving. A compromise was reached. Persephone could return if she hadn't eaten anything in the underworld, which of course she had. 6 pomegranate seeds. Just enough to legally bind her to a part-time gig in the land of the dead. Thus began her dual role, half the year on Earth with Demeter, ushering in spring and summer, the other half with Hades in the underworld, giving us fall and winter. The ancient Greeks invented seasonal depression with a myth, but here's where things get interesting. Over time, Persephone embraced her role as Queen of the Dead. She wasn't just a sad, kidnapped flower girl. She became a ruler, calm, firm, and quietly powerful. Mortals prayed to her for mercy, for safe passage, for understanding the balance between life and death. She represents transformation, not just seasonal, but emotional. The shift from innocence to strength, from being taken to taking control. Persephone is the goddess of duality. She walks through flowers and bones with equal grace. She's the reason flowers bloom, and the reason they wilt. Before Psyche was even old enough to understand the word goddess, she was being compared to one. By the time she reached womanhood, statues of Aphrodite were gathering dust, while mortals travelled miles just to glimpse the face of this mortal girl. Her beauty wasn't simply admired, it was worshipped. Entire crowds treated her as if she were Aphrodite, reincarnated in flesh and bone. People whispered that she must be divine, that no mortal woman could look like this by accident. But for Psyche, all the reverence felt hollow. She walked through cities and villages like a phantom, adored but untouched, celebrated but alone. No one dared to approach her with true affection. Men looked at her like a living painting, flawless, silent, untouchable. Even her family, though proud, grew uneasy. Her 2 sisters had married noble men, begun families, and lived the kind of grounded, warm lives that Psyche herself craved. But no suitor would dare to court a girl believed to be a rival of Aphrodite, and therein lay the danger. You see, the gods weren't fond of competition, especially Aphrodite. Watching her temples grow silent while mortals laid garlands at the feet of a mere girl made the goddess burn with divine rage. To her, Psyche wasn't a beautiful child. She was an insult carved into flesh. Yet Psyche knew none of this. She spent her days walking gardens alone, speaking to no one. She'd never felt a lover's touch or heard a whispered vow in the dark. Her beauty had become a curse, one that distanced her from the only thing she truly wanted, a soul that saw her, not just her face. She would stand by her window at dusk, watching the horizon fade and thinking perhaps this was her fate, to be loved by all but held by none. No priest, no oracle, no stranger ever offered an answer, until one day someone did. But it wasn't a man, it wasn't a priest, and it wasn't a mortal. It was a goddess. And she wasn't offering love, she was demanding revenge. On Mount Olympus, beauty was more than vanity. It was power, and no one wielded it like Aphrodite. She was the goddess of desire, of seduction, of divine charm. But lately, her temples echoed with emptiness. Her statues stood lonely beneath the sun. Why? Because mortals now knelt before a human girl, Psyche, as if she were the new goddess of love. To Aphrodite, this wasn't just offensive, it was treason. The goddess watched from her celestial perch, her envy twisting into hatred. She had destroyed kings for less. How dare a mortal girl steal her worshippers? How dare she exist as a living insult to divine beauty? And so, Aphrodite did what goddesses do. She summoned her son, Eros. Now, Eros wasn't just any deity. He was the god of love, yes, but not the soft, tender love mortals wrote poems about. No, Eros dealt in chaos. He sparked passion where there should be none. He made kings fall for swindlers, queens for slaves, enemies for each other. His arrows didn't ask for permission. They shattered logic, loyalty, and sometimes entire empires. Aphrodite's command was simple. Make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous, vile creature on earth. Something monstrous. Something beneath even the worms. Let her feel what it's like to be mocked by love. Eros, ever the obedient son, accepted. Bow slung over his back, quiver full of divine arrows, he descended to the mortal realm under the cover of moonlight. He found Psyche asleep in her chamber, candlelight flickering across her features like water. She was beautiful. Too beautiful. And Eros, who had pierced 1,000 hearts, felt his own skip a beat. This wasn't right. This wasn't part of the plan. Still, he reached for his arrow, but in his distraction, something went wrong. His hand slipped. The arrow pricked his skin. Just a drop. But it was enough. The god of love had just fallen victim to his own power, and in that moment, fate shifted. For Eros would no longer be his mother's weapon. He would be Psyche's silent protector. But neither of them knew what price the gods would demand for this forbidden affection. And Aphrodite would not forgive betrayal. Eros vanished before Psyche could stir from her sleep, the wound from his own arrow still warm on his skin. He had pierced countless hearts, but never once had he fallen prey to his own game. Now, with every beat of his heart, he felt a longing he didn't understand, a need to protect her, to cherish her, to hide her from the cruel eyes of Olympus. But protection came with sacrifice. He couldn't tell her the truth. If Aphrodite discovered he had disobeyed her, worse, that he had fallen in love, there would be no mercy. Not for him. Not for Psyche. So Eros made a quiet vow. He would love her from the shadows. Meanwhile, Psyche's life grew stranger by the day. No suitors came. Her beauty, once a spectacle, now seemed cursed. Whispers of divine punishment swirled through the kingdom. Her father, desperate and afraid, consulted the oracle of Apollo, and the words returned were cruel. She shall not wed a mortal man. Instead she will marry a monster, a beast feared even by the gods. Send her to the mountaintop, dressed as a bride. There her fate awaits. Her family wept, her sisters gasped, but Psyche stood still, silent, as if the wind had carved her into stone. A monster? This was her destiny? Not love, not choice, but sacrifice? Still she agreed. Not out of courage, but out of resignation. She had been adored like a goddess, yet never touched by love. Perhaps this cruel, monstrous fate was simply balance. Eros watched from above, his heart twisting with guilt. He had meant to protect her, but now the gods had spun a web he couldn't untangle. If he intervened openly, his mother would know, but if he did nothing, Psyche would be lost. So he devised a plan. He would take her to a secret place, a hidden palace known only to him, cloaked in illusion and silence. He would love her, not as a god, but as a shadow. He would never show his face, never speak his name, and above all, he would never tell her the truth. Because if she knew who he was, who she was truly with, everything would shatter. Even the god of love was afraid of heartbreak. The wind was soft but strong as it carried Psyche away from the mountain peak. She had expected cold rock and gnashing teeth. She had braced for a monster's roar. But instead, silence. Gentle, surreal silence. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the mountain. She stood in a meadow of glowing flowers, more radiant than any garden she had ever known. A path of polished stone wound through the field, leading to something impossible. A palace, grander than anything human hands could build. Its pillars shimmered like moonlight on water. Its halls whispered her name without sound. Psyche stepped through the threshold, expecting fear, but finding peace. Servants she couldn't see guided her hands, washed her feet, placed robes upon her shoulders. Food appeared, warm and fragrant, though no one set the table. At night, a voice, deep, tender and kind, spoke from the shadows. "Do not be afraid. You are safe. This is your home." It was him, her unseen husband, the one the oracle had promised. But there was no snarling beast, no monstrous form, just a voice. And strangely, it didn't frighten her. He never revealed himself, not even in darkness. Each night, he joined her in the quiet velvet of the bedchamber. He touched her face like a dream. He whispered laughter in her ear. And each morning, he was gone before the sun rose. She was falling. Fast. Love without sight. Intimacy without form. Each word he spoke made her ache for more, but the one thing he always begged was this: never try to see me. She asked once, gently, why? The voice tensed. If you see me, I must leave you, forever. And so she obeyed. But the mystery grew heavier with each passing day. How could such a kind, thoughtful man be the monster the oracle warned of? Why must love hide its face? And why, when she whispered her name, did he never whisper his? Psyche told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need to know. But the human heart is a curious thing, and the seeds of doubt, once planted, never stay buried for long, especially when family comes to visit, and especially when sisters come bearing poison disguised as love. It had been weeks, perhaps months. Time moved strangely in the invisible palace. Psyche knew peace, laughter, luxury, and love. But she also knew isolation. No faces, no names, no truth. Just a voice in the dark and shadows that kissed her lips. Then, one morning, her husband's voice was different. "Sorrow will follow if you see them," he said. "See who?" "Your sisters. They believe they come out of love, but what they bring is ruin." Psyche's heart cracked. She missed them. Their teasing, their warmth, even their jealousy. They were her last connection to the mortal world, to the girl she used to be before gods and palaces and mystery husbands. She pleaded, "Let me see them. Please. Just once." Eros hesitated, but he could never deny her. He agreed, with one warning: do not let their words poison what we have. They will try to unravel your trust. You must not listen. And so, the winds that once lifted Psyche carried her sisters to the garden gates of the invisible palace. When they saw her, they were stunned. She was alive, more than alive, radiant, draped in silks finer than any queen, her skin glowing like starlight. They embraced her, laughing nervously, hiding their envy beneath brittle smiles. "Where is your husband?" one asked. Psyche smiled. "He comes only at night. I've never seen him." The sisters froze. "You've never seen him?" She nodded. "He won't let you see his face?" The other gasped. "What if he's hideous? A beast? Or worse? What if he's one of the gods using you and laughing behind your back?" Their voices dripped with sweet concern, but Psyche felt the change. The old sibling rivalry was still there, now twisted into something darker. Jealousy sharpened their words. "He keeps you hidden, blind, dependent. Is that love or imprisonment?" The seed of doubt was planted. They saw it take root, and they smiled. As they left, they kissed her cheeks and whispered, "Just take a lamp one night, see for yourself. If he loves you, what harm can truth do?" Psyche watched them disappear into the wind, and for the first time since arriving in paradise, she couldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from curiosity. That night, Psyche couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, wrapped in silk sheets, his arms gently curled around her, his breath steady beside hers. But her mind was loud, louder than his heart, louder than love. Her sister's words kept repeating like a spell. What if he's a monster? What if he's using you? What if he's not who you think he is? She had trusted blindly. She had given herself, completely, to a voice in the dark. But was that love, or simply surrender? She slipped from the bed, silent as snowfall. Her bare feet kissed the cold floor, and in her hand she held a small bronze oil lamp, its wick already lit. Her heart thundered in her chest as she approached. Her fingers trembled as she leaned in, and when the light reached his face, she gasped. Not a monster, not a god in disguise, a man, beautiful beyond words. Golden curls tangled on the pillow, soft lips curved in sleep, and on his back, wings, feathered, divine, folded like a secret. This was Eros, the god of love, and he had chosen her. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from guilt. He had trusted her, warned her, loved her, and she had doubted. She leaned closer, wanting to kiss his lips, to whisper an apology before the light was gone. But fate is cruel. A single drop of hot oil spilled from the lamp and touched his bare shoulder. He awoke with a cry of pain and betrayal. His wings flared open, his eyes wide with heartbreak. "You broke your promise," he said, voice hollow. "You trusted fear more than love." "I'm sorry," Psyche whispered, falling to her knees. "I just wanted to know." Eros stepped back, his glow dimming. "Now you do." And with that, he vanished into the darkness. The palace crumbled behind him. The invisible world they'd shared unraveled like smoke. Psyche was left alone on a barren hillside, the lamp still warm in her hand and her heart shattered. She had seen the god of love, and lost him. Not to fate, but to doubt. Psyche wandered, barefoot and broken, across a world that suddenly seemed colder. The lush gardens, the silken halls, the voice that once lulled her to sleep, gone. The sky offered no answer. The earth gave no comfort. Only her regret remained. Each step was heavy with sorrow. She called out to Eros in forests, in fields, in rivers, even in dreams, but there was no reply. The god of love had vanished, not from Olympus, but from her life. In desperation, Psyche returned to her father's home. But the palace that once cherished her now whispered with rumours. Her sisters, triumphant in her misery, claimed she had married a demon and lost everything. No one believed her tale of love and gods and winged husbands. So she left again. This time not out of exile, but purpose. She would find Eros, no matter how far she had to go, no matter what wrath she might face, even if it meant entering Olympus itself. But mortals don't simply walk into the heavens, so she sought the only one who might guide her path, the one who had started it all, Aphrodite. Yes, Psyche was afraid. The goddess had reason to hate her, but if Eros still loved her, if there was even a sliver of hope, then Psyche would face even the wrath of Olympus to earn redemption. She found Aphrodite not in a golden temple, but in a private garden surrounded by mirrors. The goddess looked into her own reflection, as if searching for flaws that didn't exist. When Psyche approached, Aphrodite didn't turn. "I warned you once," the goddess said coldly, "and still, you touched what was mine." Psyche knelt. "I love him." Aphrodite laughed. "You love him? You mean the son you betrayed? The god you doubted?" "I was foolish," Psyche admitted, "but I will do anything to earn back his trust." Aphrodite turned, her eyes sharp as blades. "Anything?" Psyche nodded. The goddess smiled, but it was not kind. "Then you will suffer. You will be tested. And perhaps, at the end of your agony, you'll be worthy of my son." Thus began a trial not of strength, but of devotion, and Psyche would have to face it alone. Aphrodite didn't waste time. Her beauty was legendary, but her cruelty, when provoked, was equally divine. If Psyche wanted even a chance to see Eros again, she would have to prove her worth through a series of impossible trials. The first task was deceptively simple. Aphrodite led her to a vast storage chamber, where mountains of seeds spilled across the floor: barley, millet, lentils, poppy, wheat, and beans, all mixed together into an indistinguishable chaos. "By nightfall," Aphrodite said with a yawn, "separate them, every grain, every seed, into its proper pile. If you fail, you'll never see my son again." Then she left, humming to herself. Psyche stared at the impossible task. Even 1,000 hands wouldn't be enough to sort such a mess in a day. She knelt anyway and began, picking seed after seed, her fingers shaking. Minutes passed like hours. Her eyes blurred. She wasn't even a fraction of the way through. But the gods are always watching, and so are their creatures. Unseen by Psyche, a line of ants had been watching her toil. Not just any ants. These were sacred to Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Perhaps they pitied the girl. Perhaps they were moved by love. In a sudden flurry of motion, hundreds of tiny legs raced across the floor. The ants formed living rivers, dividing the seeds with shocking precision. In minutes, the chaos became order. Barley to one side, lentils to another, millet in neat pyramids. It was like watching nature itself rewrite the laws of time. When Aphrodite returned at dusk, she was met not with failure, but perfection. She narrowed her eyes. "You had help," she snapped. Psyche bowed her head. "I only did what I could." Aphrodite's lips twitched with something between anger and amusement. She hadn't expected the mortal girl to complete the task, much less with grace. But no matter. There were still many more trials to go. Harder ones. Deadlier ones. "This was only the beginning," the goddess warned. "If you want to see Eros again, you'll need more than luck." And yet Psyche, exhausted, sore, but standing, nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Because love, true love, was worth more than divine comfort or mortal pride. And Psyche's war had only just begun. Psyche barely had time to rest before Aphrodite handed her the second task, this one even crueler in its design. "See that river down there?" the goddess asked, pointing to a winding stream glinting beneath the afternoon sun. "It runs beside a meadow where wild rams graze. Their wool is made of gold. Bring me a tuft of it, just a handful, but do try not to die." She smirked and vanished, leaving Psyche to face what she knew was more than a simple chore. These were no gentle creatures. The golden rams were sacred, their eyes wild, and their horns sharp as spears. They were known to gore anything that entered their field, tearing intruders apart without warning. They glittered like treasure, but guarded it with rage. Still, Psyche climbed down the hill and approached the field. She crouched by the reeds, heart pounding, watching the creatures roam. Their hooves cracked against stones. Their growls echoed low and primal. There was no way she could survive entering their territory in daylight. She sank to her knees, tears welling, fear clawing at her resolve. But once again, the world watched. A quiet whisper drifted through the tall grass. A soft voice, like reeds swaying in rhythm. It was a spirit of the river, an old presence bound to the stream. "Do not enter the field while the sun is high," the spirit murmured. "The rams rage under daylight, but when twilight falls they rest in the shade. Wait, and then gather the wool from the thorny branches where it has snagged. No beast will miss it." Hope returned. Psyche waited. Hours passed. The golden rams, one by one, wandered into the trees and settled into slumber. As darkness fell, she crept forward, quiet, careful, and found tufts of golden fleece tangled in brambles and bark. By moonlight, she gathered the wool and returned to Aphrodite, who narrowed her eyes at the shimmering handful in Psyche's palm. "You live again," the goddess muttered. "Curious." But Psyche said nothing. No pride, no gloating, just silent strength, because love had taught her something even the gods had forgotten. Courage grows quiet, but it endures. And though Aphrodite was not finished testing her, Psyche was far from finished fighting. Aphrodite was growing frustrated. Psyche had survived tasks meant to crush her, using nothing but determination and a strange, unshakable luck. The goddess's smile was gone now, replaced by cold calculation. And so, for the third trial, she gave Psyche an errand that should have ended her story for good. "Fetch me water," she said. "Not from a well, not from a stream, but from the river Styx itself." Psyche paled. The Styx was no ordinary river. It marked the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. Its waters were sacred, cursed, and fatal to touch. Even the gods approached it with fear. Mortals didn't survive its banks. They didn't even return. Still, Psyche nodded. Her journey led her to the edge of a cliff so steep it seemed carved by the hands of titans. Far below, the river Styx churned like black glass, and from it rose vaporous curses and the cries of lost souls. Its current didn't flow, it coiled like a living serpent. Worse still, guarding the river were monstrous winged beings, sentries of the underworld. They swooped and screamed at anything that moved, claws sharp enough to tear bone from flesh. There was no way down, no path forward, no hope. She collapsed beneath a rock ledge, clutching the crystal vial Aphrodite had mockingly handed her. "Just a sip," the goddess had said. "Enough to show you tried." But then, a shimmer. A high-pitched hum filled the air, and from a crack in the stone emerged a tiny creature. An eagle, massive by bird standards, regal and golden-eyed. Sent by Zeus himself, the eagle of thunder and kings. Without a word, it took the vial from Psyche's hand, spread its wings, and soared down the deadly cliff. The sentries shrieked, but dared not attack, for even death respected Zeus's command. Within moments, the eagle returned, placing the sealed vial, filled with Styx's shimmering, cursed waters, into Psyche's trembling hands. She didn't ask why Zeus helped her. Perhaps Eros had once helped him. Perhaps even gods respected love's endurance. When Psyche returned to Aphrodite, the goddess accepted the vial with stony silence. Psyche had passed again, but the final trial would take her where even gods fear to go, and not all love stories survive a journey into the underworld. Aphrodite's voice was colder than the Styx itself. "For your final task," she said, "you will journey to the realm of Hades. There, you will beg Queen Persephone for a box of her beauty. A gift, you see, for me. I'm feeling quite worn lately. Your existence exhausts me." It was a death sentence. Even the boldest mortals avoided the underworld. The living did not enter Hades' realm and return, but Psyche no longer hesitated. If the path to Eros lay through darkness, then darkness would not stop her. Guided by whispers from sympathetic voices, some say Demeter, others say invisible demons of kindness, she found a hidden entrance, a cave that pierced the world's surface like a forgotten scar. She brought with her 2 coins for Charon, the ferryman, and barley cakes for Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. Every step deeper drained the warmth from her bones. The air was thick, not with smoke, but silence. The souls she passed drifted like memories, thin, hollow, and unreachable. At the river Acheron, Charon accepted her payment and rowed her through still waters stained with forgotten grief. When Cerberus appeared, snarling at the threshold of Persephone's palace, she fed him the cakes. He quieted, licking his blood-stained jaws. Inside, Persephone sat serene on her obsidian throne, eyes like polished garnets. "You come for beauty," the queen said, not unkindly. "But at what cost?" "I do not want it for myself," Psyche replied. "I must deliver it to Aphrodite." Persephone nodded. Perhaps she too understood the madness of love. She handed Psyche a small sealed box, plain, unmarked, and yet unbearably heavy. "Do not open it," the queen warned. "It is not meant for your eyes." Psyche thanked her and turned to leave. The journey back was quiet, but heavier now, with temptation. The box pulsed in her hands. Surely just a peek couldn't hurt. She told herself no, over and over. But doubt, like before, crept in. What if this beauty made her worthy of Eros again? What if this was the final key? The surface was near. Her heart raced, her fingers twitched, and as light returned to her face for the first time in days, she opened the box, and darkness consumed her. The moment Psyche opened the box, expecting light and beauty, a cold mist spilled from it like a breath from the grave. It wasn't beauty, it wasn't divine radiance. It was sleep, not ordinary sleep, but the deathless slumber of the underworld, crafted by Persephone to preserve her power, not to beautify Aphrodite. Psyche didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply dropped. Her body fell softly onto the grass at the edge of the mortal world, the sealed box beside her, her limbs frozen, her breath silenced. She wasn't dead, but neither was she alive. Caught in an eternal pause, her heart stilled by her own curiosity. And that might have been the end of Psyche. But love has a way of surviving even death. Far away, in Olympus, Eros had not forgotten her. His wounds had healed, but his heart had not. He had kept away at his mother's command, tormented by visions of Psyche toiling through impossible trials. And when he heard she had entered the underworld, he knew. She had done it for him, defying Aphrodite, braving death, all for love. That was no mortal girl. That was a queen. Eros defied his mother, bursting from Olympus in a blaze of wings and gold. He raced through the skies, the clouds splitting at his heels, until he found her, motionless, silent, lying like a marble statue kissed by the dusk. He fell to his knees beside her, and he wept. Not tears of sorrow, but of rage, of regret, of love too big for words. He lifted the box gently and sealed it shut. Then, without hesitation, he leaned down and kissed her lips. Not a magical kiss, not a spell, just a kiss, a promise, a memory, a plea, and her eyes fluttered open. Psyche gasped, the sleep lifting like fog. Her hands reached for him before she could even speak. "Eros," she breathed. "You came back," he whispered. "I never stopped loving you." He held her tighter than ever before. And in that moment, all the gods who had watched, some amused, some angered, finally understood. Even the god of love had met his match. Their reunion shook Olympus. Eros, the god of love, had defied his mother. Psyche, a mortal, had defied death. And together, they had crossed the boundaries between divine and human, between duty and desire. Such love was dangerous. Aphrodite was livid. She stormed into the court of the gods, demanding punishment. "This mortal," she cried, "has mocked the gods, meddled with sacred laws, and corrupted my son. She must be erased." But the gods were no longer so certain. They had seen Psyche's trials, witnessed her suffer, persevere, and rise again. Her love had survived what no mortal love ever had. Still, the matter had to be decided, and so they turned to Zeus. The king of the gods sat silent on his throne, lightning in one hand, fate in the other. He had watched all of it, from Psyche's fall to her rise, from her doubt to her devotion. At last, he spoke. "There is power," Zeus said, "in a love that endures." Aphrodite opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "You have tested her. She has passed. More than any mortal I have ever seen. She is not unworthy of Olympus. She is proof that even mortals can love like gods." Then he turned to Eros and Psyche. "You want to be together, truly, forever?" They both nodded. "Then so be it." With a flick of his hand, Zeus summoned a goblet filled with ambrosia, the drink of the gods. He offered it to Psyche. "Drink, and you will no longer be mortal. Your heart will beat with eternity. Your soul will live among us. But your trials will not be erased. You will carry them, as we all carry the stories that shape us." Psyche took the goblet. Her hands didn't tremble. She drank. Warmth spread through her, not burning but blooming. Her senses expanded. Her heartbeat slowed, then deepened, like a bell tolling across centuries. And just like that, she was divine, no longer mortal, no longer less. Eros took her hand, and in front of all Olympus, they were declared husband and wife. Love, for once, had not ended in tragedy. It had been crowned. The moment Psyche drank the ambrosia, the transformation was complete, not just in body, but in spirit. Her skin shimmered with divine radiance, her eyes now holding galaxies rather than tears. The gods who once scoffed at her mortal blood now watched in awe. For the first time in Olympus's long memory, a mortal had earned her place among them, not by bloodline, but by devotion. She was no longer Psyche the girl, or Psyche the beautiful. She was now Psyche the immortal, a goddess in her own right. Even Aphrodite, who had once cursed her, could no longer deny what stood before her. A woman who had faced death, temptation, betrayal, and isolation, and still chosen love over pride. Still, the goddess of love wasn't quick to forgive. But Eros, ever his mother's son and yet fiercely Psyche's husband, stepped forward. "She is no rival to your beauty, mother," he said gently. "She is something else entirely, the soul that understands love." And in that moment, the tension melted, not completely, but enough. Aphrodite's silence was her surrender. Zeus proclaimed her goddess of the soul, Psyche, whose very name in Greek meant both soul and breath of life. Her trials had shaped her not into a statue of perfection, but into the embodiment of what love endures. A great feast was held on Olympus. Nectar flowed like rivers, stars danced in celebration, and even the fates smiled at the story they had once woven in whispers. Psyche stood by Eros, no longer uncertain or afraid. She was equal. She was divine. Together, they watched the skies above and the mortal world below, guardians of love and the soul's journey. And from their union, a daughter was born. Hedone, goddess of pleasure and delight, symbol of joy born from the union of love and soul. Where once Psyche had walked among thorns and shadows, she now danced in eternal light. Not because she was perfect, but because she had loved, fallen, suffered, and risen again. She was proof that even mortals, even the broken-hearted, could reach the heavens, one trial at a time. And so, the tale of Eros and Psyche did not end in tragedy, as so many mortal loves do, but in transformation. Not into myth, but into something far greater, a truth whispered across centuries, from temples to bedrooms, from storytellers to dreamers. Love, real love, is not easy. It is tested, it is doubted, it is wounded. But when it endures, it becomes eternal. Psyche's journey had begun with beauty, a curse she never asked for. She had been worshipped by strangers, envied by sisters, manipulated by gods. She had been punished for being loved, then punished again for loving back. And yet, she never stopped trying. Even when her heart broke, even when her faith cracked, she kept walking. And Eros, the god of love, he learned too. That love is not a weapon, not a game, not a secret in the shadows. It is light, yes, but only if it is faced. Together they taught even Olympus a lesson it had long forgotten. Love does not belong solely to the gods. It belongs to anyone willing to fight for it. In temples across Greece, lovers would offer prayers not just to Aphrodite, but to Psyche. They would whisper her name before marriages, births, and even funerals. Because she wasn't just a goddess, she was a reminder. that the soul can survive despair, that love, when it falls, can rise again, and that no matter how deep the underworld, no matter how sharp the trial, the heart knows the way back. Today, long after temples have crumbled and empires have fallen, the story still lives. In the word psyche, meaning soul. In the word psychology, the study of that soul. And in every tale where love is tested and triumphs, Eros and Psyche live on, not as marble statues, but as echoes within all of us. Every time we choose trust over fear, forgiveness over pride, and love over silence, we walk their path. And perhaps, like them, we become a little more divine. Long before she was feared, before statues froze mid-scream and serpents whispered across marble floors, Medusa was a mortal girl, beautiful beyond compare. Her beauty was not loud or proud. It simply existed, uninvited, like sunlight slipping through stone. Her hair shimmered like strands of midnight silk. Her eyes held the calm of oceans before storms, and her presence, though quiet, unsettled kings and gods alike. She was born into a family of monsters, in a time where monsters were worshipped and feared in equal measure. Her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal, fierce, and monstrous by design. But Medusa was different. She alone was mortal. She alone could die. And perhaps that made her even more precious. But Medusa wanted no throne, no lovers, no crown of divine favour. She chose something rarer, devotion. As a young woman, she entered the sacred service of Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, war, and restraint. In the echoing marble temple built high on cliffs above the sea, Medusa swept the floors, lit the incense, and whispered prayers long before dawn. She took the vows of chastity, purity, and silence, not because she was forced to, but because she believed. She admired Athena, not just as a goddess, but as an ideal, strong, untouchable, above the chaos of mortal hearts. In time, even the people began to whisper that Medusa was a living statue of Athena herself. Worshippers would sneak glances at her while pretending to pray. Her face became a symbol, her voice rarely heard, her life bound in sacred duty. But beauty, even in a temple, is not safe. Word of Medusa's grace spread beyond the temple walls, past the cities, through forests, into the realm of gods, and with it came danger. For in Olympus, desire often wore a divine face, and the line between admiration and possession was razor thin. One god in particular took notice, not a god of wisdom, not a god of restraint, but a god of seas, storms, and appetites. And while Medusa kept her vows, fate had already begun to twist. Because in the realm of gods, even purity can be punished. And soon, Medusa's sanctuary would become her prison. Far beneath the crashing waves and coral palaces of the deep, Poseidon ruled the seas with pride, fury, and a hunger that was never fully satisfied. He had tamed monsters, birthed storms, and claimed goddesses, but his eyes now turned to something far less divine. A mortal, Medusa. Her beauty had reached even the ears of Olympus, but it was her stillness, her discipline, her untouchable grace that obsessed him. She belonged to no man, no god, no mortal king. She had chosen a life of devotion, one that placed her far from desire, and perhaps that was what tempted Poseidon most. The more she prayed, the more he watched. And one evening, when the tide was high and the temple was empty, Poseidon rose from the sea. He did not knock. Gods rarely ask permission. He entered Athena's sacred temple as water pooled beneath his feet, a trail of seawater soaking the marble floor. Medusa, alone and unsuspecting, turned, only to find the sea god looming in the shadows, his trident left behind, but his hunger very much present. She called out to Athena, but her cries echoed unanswered. She ran, but temples, built for worship, were not made for escape. And there, beneath the cold stone gaze of Athena's statue, Poseidon defiled what was sacred. It was not a seduction. It was a violation. When it was over, Poseidon vanished, leaving nothing but salt and silence behind. Medusa, broken, curled beneath her goddess's image, waiting for justice, for comfort, for anything divine. But gods are not always just. When Athena returned to her temple and saw the desecration, her fury was absolute, but not at Poseidon, at Medusa. Whether out of pride, denial, or divine law, Athena blamed her priestess for allowing the temple to be defiled. Whether she saw Medusa as complicit or simply inconvenient didn't matter. The purity of her sanctuary had been broken, and so the goddess of wisdom passed judgment, not on the god who had violated, but on the mortal who had been violated. Because even in myth, power protects itself. And Medusa, once a symbol of sacred beauty, would now be transformed into a warning no one could ignore. The temple floor was still stained with seawater when Athena returned. The incense had long burned out. The silence was heavy, and at its centre, Medusa knelt in shame, her head bowed beneath the unblinking gaze of her goddess. But Athena's eyes were not filled with pity. They burned with fury. For her temple, her sanctuary of reason, discipline, and virgin purity, had been defiled. And though Poseidon had violated sacred ground, it was Medusa who bore the blame. To Athena, there could be no forgiveness. Gods never apologized, and temples never forgot. The punishment had to be symbolic, eternal. She stepped down from her statue's pedestal and stood over Medusa, who trembled, confused, awaiting mercy from the very goddess she had worshipped for years. But mercy was not given. Instead, Athena's voice echoed like thunder between marble walls. "You have brought shame into my house. Let the world see what becomes of beauty that invites destruction." With a single gesture, she reached down and touched Medusa's forehead. The transformation was immediate. Golden hair turned to writhing serpents, their hissing a cruel mimicry of whispered prayers. Her skin lost its warmth. Her gaze became a weapon. Her eyes, once soft with sorrow, now held a terrible power. Anyone who looked into them would turn to stone. Not enemies, not invaders. Anyone. It was not a punishment of protection. It was isolation. A curse disguised as defense. Medusa cried out, her voice no longer human. Her tears, once salt water, now dried before falling. Her breath became still. Her reflection shattered mirrors. And worst of all, she could no longer look at another soul without destroying it. Athena did not weep. She did not turn away. She simply watched as her priestess, once beautiful and devout, became something else entirely. A monster. The temple doors closed behind Medusa as she fled into exile, her cries echoing through the hills. No home, no temple, no sisters, no prayers, just stone trails in her wake. And from the cliffs of Olympus, Athena returned to her throne, unmoved. For in the eyes of the gods, punishment need not be fair, only lasting, and Medusa's face would last longer than memory. Banished from temple and city, Medusa wandered into the wilderness, alone, cursed, and feared. Her steps carved a trail of stone across the land, each accidental glance at a passing creature turning it to lifeless marble. Birds mid-flight, deer in the brush, even insects that dared meet her gaze, frozen forever in silence. She sought refuge where no man would follow, in the distant lands beyond rivers and ruin, to a bleak, windswept island at the edge of the world, a place untouched by gods or mortals. There she built no shelter. What use was a roof when the stars offered no comfort? What use were walls when her enemies had once been her protectors? The cave she entered was already half filled with statues, long-forgotten warriors, beasts, or perhaps even fellow wanderers who met her eyes for a moment too long. And so began her second life, not as a priestess, but as a pariah. Medusa no longer wept. Tears belonged to the girl she once was. The girl who believed in justice, who offered incense to Athena, who thought love could be earned through loyalty. That girl had died on the temple floor. In her place stood something else. Not a monster, but a woman shaped by betrayal. Her serpents whispered to her in dreams, not in words, but in instincts. Warnings of intruders, echoes of approaching footsteps. Her hair had become her guardians. Her eyes, her curse. Her soul, a flickering memory. She began carving the walls of her cave with images. Faces, hands, the temple she once served. Even her sisters. Her memories were fading, and stone was all she had left. Occasionally, heroes would come, lured by stories of a cursed maiden, or tempted by the challenge of slaying a beast. They believed she was evil, that by killing her they might rise in glory, but none of them returned. They underestimated her, not just her power, but her pain. And yet, with each death, Medusa felt less like a victim, and more like the very monster the world imagined. Her humanity had not died, but it was fading. And the gods? They had already looked away. Far from Medusa's cave, in the bustling city-states and sacred temples of Greece, her name began to change. No longer spoken in mourning, it passed from mouth to mouth like a warning, distorted, retold, and reshaped. Medusa, the Gorgon. Medusa, the cursed temptress. Medusa, whose gaze turns men to stone. Her past as a devoted priestess, a mortal girl who served the gods, was buried beneath myth. In its place rose a monster's tale, a creature with serpent hair, whose eyes held the wrath of the underworld. They didn't tell of Poseidon's violation. They didn't mention Athena's cruel punishment. The gods' roles were edited out, smoothed over by priests and poets who preferred their gods spotless and their monsters clearly marked. Children were warned to obey their parents, or Medusa would come in the night. Soldiers carved her image onto shields, not to honour her, but to mock her. Her face became a symbol of fear, a cautionary tale. And yet, her image spread. Artists painted her on pottery. Her twisted silhouette danced across mosaics. Her snarling face was carved into temple walls, not in reverence, but as a weapon, used by the very gods who had cast her out. Medusa, from exile, could only feel the weight of their words. She didn't ask to become legend. She didn't ask to be feared. She had simply survived. And survival, to those in power, is threatening. On the mainland, some whispered of her as more than a monster. Old women in mountain villages left offerings near caves, murmuring that Medusa protected women who had been hurt. They didn't fear her, they pitied her. They called her guardian of the wronged. But these voices were soft, and the roar of hero myths drowned them out. Medusa remained hidden, unaware of how deeply her name had split. Monster to some, martyr to others. What she did know was this. No matter how far she hid, they would keep coming. Men with swords and shining armour. Men who thought killing her meant glory. Men who had never cared who she was, only what she had become. And somewhere, a new challenger was already being born. A boy who would grow into a man, a hero, and her final visitor. While Medusa lived in exile, her legend spreading like wildfire, a boy named Perseus was born to a different kind of silence, a prison of prophecy. His mother, Danae, had been locked away in a bronze tower by her father, King Acrisius, desperate to stop a prophecy that her son would one day cause his death. But the gods don't respect mortal locks. Zeus came to Danae not with love, but as golden rain, slipping past walls and warnings. From that divine encounter, Perseus was born. When the king discovered the child, he dared not kill a son of Zeus directly. So he cast mother and infant into the sea, sealed in a wooden chest, a quiet execution wrapped in cowardice. But the sea, ruled by Poseidon, carried them not to death, but to refuge. They washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman took them in. Danae raised Perseus in hiding, teaching him strength, humility, and the silence of survival. She never spoke Zeus's name. She never told her son what kind of god had sired him. Years passed. Perseus grew into a sharp-eyed young man, clever, strong, but untested. And then came the king of Seriphos, Polydectes. He wanted Danae for himself. Perseus stood in the way. The king, feigning kindness, invited Perseus to a feast. Each guest was to bring a gift. Perseus, poor and proud, brought nothing. Polydectes sneered. "Then bring me the head of Medusa." Laughter followed. It was meant to humiliate him. But Perseus, stung by pride and unaware of the truth behind the name, accepted. The gods watched with interest. Athena, perhaps still nursing guilt over what she'd done to Medusa, saw an opportunity. She would aid this boy, not for justice, but for balance. She and Hermes came to Perseus in dreams, whispering guidance. They gave him tools, winged sandals to fly, a polished shield like a mirror, an adamantine sword, and the helm of Hades to vanish from sight. But no gift came without purpose. Perseus had been chosen not just to kill a monster, but to complete a myth, one that began not with him, but with a girl, alone in a temple, praying to gods who never listened. Perseus set off with divine tools at his side and the weight of a king's challenge on his shoulders. But finding Medusa was not as simple as crossing land or sea. Her location had been buried by time, hidden even from the gods who had cursed her. To find her, Perseus needed answers that no mortal could give. He sought out the Grey, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. They were older than gods, draped in shadow and spite, living in the void between light and nightmare. They knew where Medusa slept, for they were her kin. Perseus didn't beg. He didn't plead. He waited until one of the sisters passed the eye to another, and snatched it from their hands. "Tell me," he demanded, holding their only vision hostage, "or remain blind forever." They hissed, but they spoke. They told him of a distant island, beyond mortal maps, past crags that tore ships to splinters, where stone statues littered the shores like fallen soldiers. An island where no birds sang and no stars dared linger. The lair of Medusa. And so Perseus flew, sandals slicing through clouds, heart pounding. Not with fear, but anticipation. He saw himself returning to Seriphos with a head in his hands, triumphant, Danae proud, Polydectes humbled. He did not yet question the story he'd been told. That Medusa was a monster. That she deserved to die. The gods had prepared him, but they had not warned him. They had not said that her cave was lined with the remains of men who called themselves heroes. They had not said that her eyes were not cruel, only cursed. And they had not said that her face, beneath the serpents behind the myth, still carried the shape of a woman once full of faith. As he flew across the sea, the winds howled louder, as if trying to speak. But Perseus heard only silence, a silence the gods knew well, because when you create a monster, the last thing you want is for someone to hear her speak. When Perseus landed on the shores of the island, the world seemed to hold its breath. No breeze, no bird song, only statues, hundreds of them, scattered like fallen warriors across the cliffs and crags. Their faces were twisted in terror, mouths frozen mid-scream, eyes wide with the last thing they ever saw. Her. He stepped over stone limbs and shattered shields, his sword sheathed, his mirrored shield held tight. Athena had warned him, never look at her directly, use reflection, be swift, be silent. But what the goddess hadn't said was why the statues looked not just terrified, but surprised, as if in their final second they'd realized they were wrong. Perseus moved deeper into the cavern, wings folding behind him. The air was thick with damp moss, snake musk, and something else. Sorrow. The serpents hissed before he saw her, a low symphony of warning and weariness. Then she appeared, not charging, not roaring, not even aware. Medusa slept, coiled on a bed of stone, arms curled around herself like a child. Her face, in the mirrored shield, was peaceful, fragile. A strange beauty lingered, though her features were half hidden beneath the tangle of venomous serpents that rested for now in slumber. She did not look like a monster. She looked like someone who had been left behind. Perseus hesitated. This was not the roaring beast sung about in legends, not the terror painted on urns and shields. She was just a woman, cursed, asleep, and utterly alone. But the gods had given him a task. He remembered his mother. He remembered the mocking voice of Polydectes. He remembered glory. And so he raised the sword, his eyes fixed on the mirrored shield. He took one step closer. A snake lifted its head. Medusa stirred. Her eyes fluttered, still closed. She did not scream. She did not fight. She barely breathed. And in that moment, Perseus struck. The blade hissed through the air with a divine edge. Silence followed. When her head fell into the satchel lined with bronze scales, the island exhaled. The curse was done. Or so he thought. Because you can kill a body, but not a story. And Medusa's story was just beginning. Perseus didn't linger. With Medusa's head sealed in the enchanted satchel, its gaze still potent even in death, he rose into the sky, sandals beating against the clouds. But the silence of the island clung to him. Not a silence of victory, something colder. The head still pulsed with quiet power. Though severed, it was not lifeless. The snakes writhed, tongues flickering, sensing the world beyond the bag. Her eyes remained open, unblinking, capable of petrifying anything that dared peer within. Perseus didn't look. He dared not. The gods had given him a weapon now, a divine trump card, but he began to feel uneasy carrying it. As he flew across the ocean, creatures of shadow stirred in the waves. For this act, though heroic in the mortal realm, had awakened old pacts. Medusa's death had not gone unnoticed. Deep in the sea, her slayer had disturbed the balance. Poseidon felt it. Athena knew it. The fates wove quietly. And far above Olympus, a storm began to gather. Still, Perseus pressed on. His thoughts were consumed with what came next. He would return to Seriphos. He would silence King Polydectes, free his mother, restore his name. He would be a hero. That's what the stories promised. But the weight of the satchel told another tale. He remembered the mirrored shield and the face he'd seen. She hadn't snarled. She hadn't lunged. She'd been sleeping. Was that truly a monster? Or had he killed a warning wrapped in misunderstanding? He pushed the thought aside. The gods had guided him, hadn't they? But as the wind howled louder, Perseus noticed something odd. The head was humming, not a sound, but a sensation, as if it still remembered the world, as if the soul of Medusa, cursed, betrayed, mutilated, still looked outward, still aware, still waiting. And though Perseus would go on to slay monsters, rescue maidens, and carve his name into the stars, he would never again sleep soundly, because sometimes, at night, he swore he heard the faint rattle of snakes beneath his bedroll, and sometimes he dreamed not of victory, but of a girl kneeling in a temple, begging the gods to protect her. Perseus returned to Seriphos with wind-swept hair, divine armor, and the head of a legend tucked under his cloak. The people greeted him with cheers, unaware of what lay in the satchel, unaware of what it had cost. But King Polydectes was no fool. He had never expected the boy to survive. His challenge had been a death sentence wrapped in mockery. So when Perseus strode into the palace, head held high, the king's sneer quickly turned to unease. "You brought me a gift?" Polydectes mocked, trying to hold on to control. Perseus nodded once. "A token of your request." And with that, he opened the satchel. For a brief second, Polydectes met the gaze of Medusa. Just a second. It was enough. Stone cracked through his skin like frost on glass. His eyes froze wide. His final breath was trapped behind lips turned to granite. The king, so smug, so cruel, was now nothing more than a statue. The room erupted in screams. Courtiers fled. Some fell to their knees. Perseus remained silent, his expression unreadable. His mother, Danae, rushed to embrace him. Finally free. And still, Perseus said nothing about the girl in the cave. To them, Medusa was a monster defeated, a tool used, an obstacle overcome. No one asked who she had been, but Perseus remembered. The way her body fell, the way her face in the mirror had not snarled, but pleaded. Still the story spread quickly. Songs were sung, temples raised. Perseus was called Gorgon Slayer, champion of the gods, breaker of curses. They etched his name into marble, never once carving hers beside it. In his later years, he'd place Medusa's head on Athena's shield, by the goddess's own command. Her face, once scorned, was now turned outward as a weapon of divine justice. But not justice for her, justice for others. Even in death, Medusa served. Even in silence, her power remained. And Perseus, the golden hero, walked beneath that shield for years to come, every victory won with the face of the woman he had slain. He was loved. She was feared. And neither could change the roles the gods had written for them. After Perseus's triumph, Athena summoned him to Olympus, not just to praise him, but to claim what had always belonged to her. Not the sword, nor the sandals, nor the helm of Hades. She wanted the head of Medusa. Perseus obeyed, offering the satchel without question. And with practiced grace, Athena took the severed head of her former priestess and affixed it to her shield, her aegis, turning it into a weapon of legend. The Gorgon's face, once radiant, once innocent, now snarled in frozen rage from the bronze curve of the goddess's arm. Wherever Athena marched, war followed. Enemies turned to stone at the sight of it. Cities fell. Statues of the aegis spread across temples and coinage. Her shield became both warning and banner. But no one ever asked why Medusa had been cursed in the first place. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, carried the face of a woman she had once punished. Not as a reminder, not out of guilt, but as a symbol of divine power, of what happens when mortals overstep. Yet some whispered differently. Some said Athena was not reclaiming a weapon, but granting Medusa immortality. That by placing her on the aegis, she ensured Medusa would never be forgotten. That the girl who had once cried in her temple was now etched into eternity, where even the gods had to carry the consequences of their actions. But the truth, as always with gods, was layered in paradox. Athena had condemned Medusa for shaming her temple, and now she wielded that same shame as a trophy. The transformation was complete. Medusa had been a priestess, then a victim, then a monster, now a weapon, an icon. And yet, somewhere in the curve of that sculpted jaw, in the tragic slant of her petrified eyes, something still lived, something the world couldn't unsee. Because even as she turned armies to stone, there were always a few, just a few, who looked upon her face and didn't see a monster. They saw a question, a protest, a warning, and that is a power no blade could match. Medusa's face now stared outward from Athena's aegis, unblinking, eternal. To most, it was a symbol of divine terror, of enemies turned to stone, of battles won with a single glance. But to those who looked closer, that gaze held something more than fury. It held memory. It held injustice. It held the truth no temple scroll ever dared to write. Through the centuries, Warriors marched behind that shield, unaware that the face they wielded once belonged to a woman who had never raised a hand in violence. Her curse, gifted by the gods, had become a tool of empire. The weaponization of her trauma was complete. Still, her eyes continued to see. Long after her voice had been silenced, her gaze bore witness to 1,000 battles. She watched kings rise and fall. She saw temples crumble and heroes turn cruel. She saw altars raised to men who had called her a monster, and prayers whispered by women who understood what she had lost. And sometimes, those women left offerings. Tiny clay serpents placed at hidden shrines, a lock of hair wrapped in cloth, a whispered name buried in the dark, not out of fear, but remembrance. Because long before Medusa became a cautionary tale, she had been a protector. Her cave had become a graveyard of would-be conquerors, yes, but also a sanctuary, a place no man could enter and survive, a place where the hunted became untouchable. In time, her legend fractured. To some, she remained the Gorgon. To others, she became something else entirely, a symbol of resistance, a goddess of wrath and wounded justice, a spirit that stood between the powerless and the predators. Her myth bent and twisted as myths do, but the core remained. A woman wronged, a woman reshaped by pain, a woman whose story had been stolen, but whose stare could never be taken away. And so her gaze endured, across paintings, sculptures, shields, coins, and dreams. And in every retelling, someone new would pause. Someone would ask, was she really the monster? And in that question, Medusa lived again. Centuries passed. Empires crumbled. New gods rose and fell. But Medusa endured, not as flesh and blood, but as symbol and shadow. Her face, chiseled into marble and cast in bronze, migrated across cultures. In Byzantium, in Rome, in forgotten corners of the world, her image lingered just beneath the surface of myth and memory. But something strange happened over time. The tale began to split. In one version, she remained the monster, the Gorgon, the serpent-haired killer who turned men to stone with a glare. Her head became a talisman against evil, mounted above doors, gates, and armor. Soldiers carried her into war, hoping her legend would strike fear deeper than any spear. But another story quietly grew alongside it, one whispered by poets, philosophers, and women whose voices rarely made it into scrolls. In this story, Medusa was not a beast to be slain, but a wronged woman, punished for beauty, cursed for a crime committed against her. This version didn't roar, it murmured. It asked why a goddess of wisdom would punish her own servant, why the god of the sea would face no consequence, why so many men sought to kill her when she simply wanted to be left alone. In taverns, in libraries, in hidden corners of temples, these questions bloomed like weeds in cracks of marble. And slowly, the image of Medusa began to shift again. She became a mirror, not of terror, but of truth. Women began to see themselves in her, survivors of violence, victims of silence, souls forced to wear the label of monster simply for being feared. Her serpents were no longer a punishment, but a crown. Her eyes, not a curse, but a defense sharpened by betrayal. Even now, in modern tales and art, Medusa rises again, not to petrify, but to testify. She stares from paintings with grief and fury. Her story is retold not to glorify Perseus, but to ask why he was called a hero at all, because myths evolve, and sometimes the monster is not the one with fangs, but the one holding the sword. And in every generation that dares to question the old story, Medusa blinks, just once, and watches them begin to understand.